It turns out that the price of electricity in the Philippines is more expensive than some of the other countries in the Asian region for a number of reasons, but the main reason, approximately 3/4 of the reason, is subsidies which are applied by governments in other countries to ensure that their tariffs are kept low. And the Philippines doesn't do that for a number of very good reasons. It also turns out that the intrinsic cost of delivering electricity in the Philippines is high relative to some of the other countries in the region. It's not double, but it is somewhat higher. And the reason for that is primarily that the Philippines relies on a lot of fossil fuel generation, and most of that fossil fuel generation relies on imported fuel. And in the case of some of the domestic fuel, and I'm talking about domestic gas, that's also indexed to international fuel prices. So there's not a lot that can be done about that. The country doesn't have a lot of cheap fossil fuel reserves, and it is going to be reliant on imported fuel for probably a very long time. The other reason for the high cost of producing and delivering electricity in this country is that you have a relatively small grid, so there's economies of scale. And to meet the demand, there's a relatively small number of plants which are probably too large for the grid and don't have high reliability. So that creates a reserve margin issue. It means that for periods when plants are down, additional plant needs to be built to cover that, and that adds to the reserve margin. That means there's a significant amount of plants sitting around at any one time doing nothing, and that has to be paid for. An additional problem is that you have a relatively large amount of hydro in the country, and hydroelectricity is fine in the wet season when there's plenty of water in the reservoir, but it's not so useful in the dry season when there's no water. So again, to cover that capacity shortfall in the dry season for hydro, you need additional thermal plant to be built, which isn't running very often. So the net effect of that is that it is intrinsically more expensive to produce, transmit and deliver electricity in this country. And that accounts for around a quarter of the difference in tariffs you see between some of the neighbouring countries in the Philippines. But the major part of the difference is due to subsidies that are applied by other countries, which in my judgment are unsustainable and will eventually lead to unpleasant consequences. It's unlikely that the intrinsic cost of delivering electricity is going to go down meaningfully. Exit external factors such as cheap fossil fuel coming from overseas. So these are market forces that are out of the control. But apart from these external forces, it's hard to see how the cost of electricity, and therefore the price in the Philippines, can come down by large quantities. Conversely, unless a few things are done quite quickly, there's a risk that prices could go up by quite a lot.